how do you have any tips or suggestions on how to achieve success in medical school, specifically like some study habits, some time management tricks that you've learned over the years that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I found is that I think I mentioned it really briefly in the beginning that I was a teacher and I was a lecturer. So it's actually really strange to actually now be a student. What's more strange is that some of my classmates were my students that I used to teach at McGill. It's like, whoa, I remember teaching you. Now you're my classmates and future colleagues. So that's very fascinating to start off. Some tips and things related to studying. I found that my studying habits drastically are different than my study habits back in high school and back in university. And even between high school and university, my study habits changed. I also find that a lot of my friends have echoed the same sentiment as well, that their studies, the way they're studying and the amount of time that they're putting into is very different than how they used to do it. So don't feel like, even throughout university or high school, don't feel like you have to be married to a specific study schedule, because again, you won't study math and calculus the same way you would study for a history test, for example. But some things I really want to emphasize that it would be good for anyone. Make sure you're good at time management. Unfortunately, your responsibilities in high school is not going to go lower as you continue on your studies or whatever you do in your life. So I am married to my Google Calendar. If I don't have my Google Calendar and have something on there, it's not happening. I'm going to forget because it's just way too much stuff that I have on my plate. And you will find that too very quickly when you do more clubs and extracurriculars and, you know, spending time with your loved ones. Those are things that you want to make sure that you do, but you also don't want to forget, and that takes time as well. Particularly in medical school, I wouldn't harp and worry about the details. I know it's a very, very long way away. And it's something that I actually mentioned in the high school program that I was organizing this past weekend when we taught prospective high school students about medical school. A lot of the details that we were teaching is not so important because, again, it would be really repetitive over and over. What's really important is actually concepts. And you might be actually not used to that way of thinking because in high school, it's all multiple choice, it's all very nitty gritty. Do I remember that protein? Oh, wait, is it DNA helicase? Is it RNA polymerase 1 versus 2 or 3? That doesn't matter in medical school, right? It's more on treatments, more management. Can you recognize diseases when patients present to you? So those are much more holistic. I find that I really enjoy it because you don't have to memorize because we have something called Google if you ever forget something, right? But so, you know, unfortunately, that's how testing is in high school and even university is detailed. But once you get into medical school, it's very hard to let go of those habits. So you spend now way too much time studying versus back before you're like, oh, I'm not spending enough time studying. So other than that, medical school is difficult, much like any other schools and programs. My way of making sure I don't go completely off the rocker and insane is having really close support network of friends. I could not have done it or still continue doing it if it wasn't for some of my closest friends I've made in medical school, because people go through stuff and personal stuff happens, and medical school is not something that is the exception. But now you also have more responsibilities. So having a very strong support system, friends, families, is incredibly important. And you want to start building that early on and building those relationships strong. Because at the end of the day, no one cares about how smart you are. You gotta remember who your loved ones are and who you can really depend on. It sounds kind of sappy and really cheesy, and I apologize for that, but I can't emphasize that enough.
Oh, that's a really important thing. Yeah.
Well, you pretty much answered a lot of the questions. Do you want to talk a little bit about like nerves and anxiety associated with applying and interviewing and like test taking, and if you had any, do you have any tips for others who maybe are applying and they're really stressed? I know I get really stressed easily. So do you have any tips?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get super worried and stressed when I have tests, even till this day. It doesn't go away. I think a little stress actually does help a little bit, because it just means your care, and also physiologically it helps, et cetera, biology. But one of my biggest tips that I've learned, and I wish I learned it a little earlier, when you're doing and studying, the best way to study is actually to test yourself. Try to make questions up, try to have your friends that you trust kind of quiz you back and forth. I find that is actually proven to be the best studying and a way to remember things, is if you are forced in a situation to actually now regurgitate information. I know some teachers in some classes actually offer practice tests, for example, right? I know a lot of my friends sometimes would just use the practice test and just like look at the answer, just circle it and do it kind of whatever. I actually save them until the very end, as I'm like confident in my studying and I want to like do the test as like a mock test, right? Pretend it's like completely like your own test. Pretend it's like an actual test, and try to do it because you want to get used to that stress. You want to get used to the testing environment. So when I was studying for the MCAT, which is a really big test for medical school admission, I would never, do a practice test in my room. I would never do it somewhere where I'm comfortable, and I actually would move to a very quiet place in a library I found, or in an empty study hall that's gonna hopefully be like very similar situation as I would write it in the actual day. So then when you write it on the final day, especially when you have a really big test that you spent a lot of time and money into, you've gotten used to this now. You're like, okay, that's pretty chill. Like, I know there's going to be like these 4 white walls. I know it's going to be this computer screen. But for others that have never like practiced it in the more correct way, you're like, oh, dang it. Like, I'm so not used to this now. So now you're worried, even before the test even started, because you're now not used to the environment. So that's something that I would recommend. I also discourage the use of highlighting everything. I used to do that myself. I used to be like, reading a rainbow and just color everything a different color every single line. It's like, yeah, I feel so smart. And that doesn't really do anything besides making it look very, very pretty. That's where I try to emphasize again, finding those important key points. What is really important? And then maybe be like, I think everything is important. And I'm like, sure. But like, what is something that teachers are emphasizing? Do they have like key messages when they finish a class? Look at those. Those are really, really important, especially in medical school. We have those key messages and key points that we have to take, because there's so much information sometimes that it's just not possible to memorize everything. Something that's related to yesterday that I taught personally to the high school students that is not studying, but very important, is exercise and eat healthy. You cannot study with a broken brain, and exercise, making your lifestyle healthy and whatnot, is going to do wonders for you. I know that I am crappy when I'm studying and testing if I've been eating junk food and being a couch potato all day. That's actually just proven biology. So yeah.